Jerusalem. October 8, 2025. The morning air, thick with the scent of autumn and ancient prayers, suddenly held a different weight. Among the thousands celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles, a profound silence descended, swallowing the city's sounds. Then, a wind began to stir, not an ordinary gust, but a deliberate breath, weaving through the temporary dwellings, carrying an unseen presence that brought men and women to their knees. What transpired next would ripple through the holy city, captured on countless cell phone videos, sparking a global conversation about prophecies, signs, and the very fabric of reality. This is the account of an event that challenged scientific understanding and stirred deep spiritual conviction, hinting at a new chapter for an ancient land. Before we delve into the details of this extraordinary occurrence, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching us from today? Let us know in the comments below. Now, let's return to that pivotal morning in Jerusalem. Jerusalem. October 8, 2025. A peculiar atmospheric condition had settled over the ancient city. Unlike the usual crispness of an autumn morning in the Judean hills, the air was thick, unusually still, and saturated with a dense, almost cloying heat. It was a warmth that pressed in, not scorching, but heavy, seeming to amplify the existing scents of myrtle, willow, and citron from the thousands of sukkahs that dotted rooftops, courtyards, and even public parks. This palpable weight in the atmosphere contributed to an unspoken sense of anticipation, a subdued quietude beneath the strengthening golden light of the nascent day. The city, usually a vibrant tapestry of sounds, the distant calls to prayer, the chimes of church bells, the multilingual chatter of pilgrims, and the ubiquitous chirping of sparrows, felt suspended, holding its breath. Around 6 o'clock, this subtle atmospheric shift intensified into a phenomenon that would defy conventional explanation. The first sign, widely reported and corroborated across disparate districts, was the abrupt cessation of birdsong. The customary morning chorus of sparrows nesting in the crevices of ancient stone walls, the cooing of doves, and the occasional flutter of larger birds over the rooftops simply ceased. It was not a gradual fading, but an instantaneous, unnatural silence that descended with an almost physical presence. The familiar sonic backdrop of Jerusalem was suddenly, starkly absent, creating a profound, unsettling void. This vacuum of sound then seemed to actively absorb the remaining audible elements of the city's awakening. The murmur of prayers, which typically carried through the morning air from countless homes, synagogues, and makeshift prayer gatherings, was likewise swallowed. The low intonations of Hebrew blessings, the hushed recitation of psalms, and the quiet petitions offered in diverse languages by pilgrims from every corner of the globe, all vanished into the expanding stillness. It was as if an unseen hand had muted the city, leaving an eerie, profound quiet that pressed in on every ear, stirring a primal sense of apprehension in those who noticed. Then, the movement began. Not with a sudden gust, but with an almost imperceptible tremor of air, a singular current that seemed to materialize from within the very heart of the city. It started as a faint rustle, barely audible, distinct from any natural wind pattern. This unique breath of air began to weave its way through the intricate network of sukkahs. These temporary dwellings, constructed in varied forms from simple canvas and wood frames to elaborate structures adorned with woven palm fronds, fruits, and flickering decorative lights, became the first visible indicators of the phenomenon. A single palm frond, forming part of a sukkah's roof, **shack**, would tremble slightly, then another, creating a ripple effect. This nascent movement quickly intensified. What began as a whisper grew into a sustained, deep sigh that seemed to emanate from the ground up, rather than from a specific direction. The air itself began to vibrate with an unseen energy, and the leaves of olive trees, usually stoic in the morning calm, now shivered with an internal tremor. The fabrics draped within the sukkahs, colorful tapestries, embroidered tablecloths, prayer shawls left hanging, billowed and snapped with an uncharacteristic force, yet without any sense of chaotic turbulence. Instead, the movement was purposeful, almost deliberate, as if an invisible, intelligent presence was traversing each structure, touching every surface, acknowledging every occupant. From the Kidron Valley to the heights of Mount Scopus, from the narrow alleys of the Old City to the modern boulevards of West Jerusalem, the phenomenon spread with a breathtaking uniformity. decorative pomegranates and grapes, hung from sukkah ceilings as symbols of abundance, swayed in unison. Dust, usually settled on the ancient paving stones, now lifted in delicate, controlled spirals, dancing in the air before gently returning to the ground. The very structures of the sukkahs, some robust, others fragile, creaked and groaned under this unseen pressure, yet none collapsed. It was a force that commanded, rather than destroyed. The reaction of the city's inhabitants, pilgrims and residents alike, was immediate, widespread, and remarkably synchronized. There was no initial panic or disorientated flight. Instead, a deep, primal instinct seemed to guide their actions. Across courtyards, within market stalls, and even along bustling thoroughfares, thousands of individuals, men, women, children, the elderly, from diverse ethnic and religious backgrounds, dropped to their knees. The act was often involuntary, a sudden genuflection born of an overwhelming, unidentifiable force. Many were observed with hands clasped together, some clutching prayer beads or small scriptures, their faces a mixture of profound awe, bewilderment, and an almost ecstatic reverence. Tears streamed down the faces of countless individuals, tears that appeared to be born not of sorrow or fear, but of an overwhelming emotional release, a connection to something utterly beyond human comprehension. Others simply gazed upwards, their eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the sky, or on the unseen forces animating the air around them. Whispers, then murmurs, began to circulate, but they were not of fear. They were expressions of wonder, of profound introspection. A phrase, repeated in countless personal accounts later collected from various witnesses, encapsulated the shared experience: something had been released. This sentiment transcended language barriers and cultural divides. It was a universal understanding that a boundary had been crossed, a veil lifted, or a force previously contained had now been unfettered into the natural realm. The atmosphere, even after the initial surge of wind began to subside, retained an altered quality. The air, though no longer moving with such intensity, felt charged, alive, imbued with a residual energy. Jerusalem, on that October morning, was left not only with the lingering echoes of an inexplicable wind but with a pervasive sense of mystery, a palpable awe, and the unsettling certainty that the spiritual and the physical had momentarily, undeniably, converged. The immediate aftermath of the inexplicable wind in Jerusalem on October 8, 2025, was characterized by a potent mix of stunned silence and burgeoning communication. The deep, unsettling quiet that had fallen over the city during the phenomenon gradually gave way to hushed whispers, then fervent discussions, as thousands attempted to process what they had just witnessed. News of the mysterious wind, described by eyewitnesses as possessing an almost sentient purpose, propagated with astonishing speed through the densely packed pilgrim communities and outward into the wider metropolitan area. Initial eyewitness accounts, often delivered in voices still trembling with awe or emotion, were rapidly shared person to person, amplified by the pervasive connectivity of modern communication. While the established global news networks remained predominantly focused on routine geopolitical developments, ongoing conflicts, and various international scandals, an entirely different narrative began to unfold on personal digital platforms. Small video clips, hastily recorded on cell phones during the event, started circulating virally. These amateur recordings, raw and unedited, provided corroborating evidence from multiple perspectives, depicting the same uncanny occurrences witnessed across the city. Footage captured near the Jaffa Gate showed national flags, carried by arriving pilgrim groups, unfurling and flapping with an intensity that defied the absence of any visible or sustained atmospheric current. These were not merely caught in a sporadic breeze, they danced and billowed as if animated by an unseen conductor, particularly noticeable against the backdrop of an otherwise calm morning. Simultaneously, videos from residential rooftops in Talpiot and the bustling market lanes of the old city showed dust, fine and reddish gold, rising from the ground in tightly wound, elegant spirals. These weren't chaotic dust devils typical of desert winds, but rather disciplined columns, twisting skyward for several seconds before gently dissipating, leaving behind a pristine surface. Accompanying these visuals was an auditory anomaly captured in several recordings, a low, resonant sound, almost a deep thrumming, that witnesses described as a distant roar or a hum from the Earth's core. It was a sound too profound to be attributed to conventional atmospheric conditions, vibrating through the valleys and seemingly resonating within the very bones of the ancient city. This deep, almost infrasonic frequency contributed significantly to the pervasive sense of solemnity and wonder, adding another layer of mystery to an already inexplicable event. As these fragments of evidence converged, interpretations began to emerge, coalescing around long-held prophecies. For a substantial portion of the population, particularly among the devout pilgrims and local religious communities, the wind was not merely a meteorological anomaly. It was immediately and widely perceived as a potent sign, a harbinger of a significant spiritual fulfillment. Discussions quickly turned to the ancient scriptures, specifically the prophecies of Zechariah. Passages describing a future time when all the nations will go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord Almighty, and to celebrate the Festival of Tabernacles, Zechariah 14 verse 16, became a central point of reference. The timing of the event lent immense weight to this interpretation. The mysterious breath of air had manifested precisely during the final days of Sukkot, the very festival mentioned in the prophecy. Moreover, Jerusalem was, at that moment, experiencing an unprecedented influx of foreign worshippers. Estimates indicated that thousands of international pilgrims, representing over 100 distinct nations, were either already within the city's ancient walls or in the process of entering, many carrying their national flags as emblems of their identity and faith. This remarkable convergence, the prophetic festival, the sudden, purposeful wind, and the gathering of nations, was not dismissed as mere coincidence by those who observed it. Instead, it was widely seen as a tangible manifestation of a profound connection between the natural event and the spiritual realm, a physical validation of ancient texts. It was as if the same air that stirred the sukkahs was also traversing the invisible boundaries of the spiritual world, calling peoples, languages, and nations to a singular, divine purpose. Furthermore, the timing of the phenomenon resonated deeply with the collective memory and emotional landscape of Israel. October 8, 2025, marked the somber second anniversary of the devastating attack that had plunged the nation into profound mourning in 2023. The streets of Jerusalem, still bearing subtle, indelible marks of that painful memory, monuments to loss, spaces of remembrance, and the quiet grief held by countless families, were, on this particular morning, filled with a different kind of sound. The pervasive murmurs of remembrance and sorrow, usually characteristic of this anniversary, were now intertwined with, and slowly being overtaken by, spontaneous outbursts of praises and fervent voices collectively crying out for peace. The wind, in this context, was not just a symbol of spiritual awakening, but was perceived by many as carrying the very memory of that national pain. Yet, it simultaneously signaled something more, an end to the cycle of lamentation that had gripped the nation. It heralded, in the hearts of many, the beginning of a promised time of restitution, a spiritual and emotional restoration, and a profound yearning for lasting peace to finally settle upon the land. The collective yearning, often expressed through song and prayer, seemed to rise with the wind itself, a national plea for healing and renewal carried on an extraordinary current. In the immediate wake of the unprecedented atmospheric phenomenon that swept through Jerusalem on October 8, 2025, the initial shock and awe swiftly transitioned into a fervent search for meaning. As reports and amateur video footage continued to circulate, the profound spiritual implications of the mysterious wind became the dominant subject of discourse, particularly within the city's diverse religious communities. Leaders and scholars, already gathered for the Feast of Tabernacles, began to offer theological and prophetic interpretations that aimed to contextualize an event that defied natural explanation. A significant convergence of activity was reported on and around the Temple Mount, a site revered by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Despite the prevailing sense of mystery, groups of devout individuals, many still visibly moved by their recent experience, gathered in impromptu prayer assemblies. These gatherings, ranging from hushed circles of contemplation to more demonstrative sessions of fervent supplication, sought to understand the divine implication of the morning's events. On the Western Wall Plaza, a site of continuous prayer, the usual prayers were interspersed with newly articulated petitions and exclamations, reflecting the profound impact of the phenomenon. Amidst one such gathering, a prominent religious leader, whose identity was initially withheld but whose words quickly resonated through the assembled faithful, delivered a statement that captured the collective sentiment. Speaking with an intensity that transcended the simple act of utterance, he described the morning's event as a trembling of the veil. This phrase, immediately understood within theological circles, suggested a momentary dissolution of the barrier between the mundane and the sacred, implying a direct, unfiltered divine intervention. The leader further asserted, with unwavering conviction, that the Spirit of God was once again moving over Jerusalem. This declaration provided a powerful framework for many, suggesting that the city, long a focal point of spiritual expectation, was now experiencing a direct manifestation of divine presence, a reawakening of ancient spiritual forces. Concurrently, within the various yeshivas and rabbinical councils across Jerusalem, influential rabbis engaged in intense deliberation, drawing parallels between the inexplicable wind and ancient prophetic texts. A particular focus emerged on the book of Ezekiel, specifically chapter 37, which describes the vision of the valley of dry bones. The passage, "Come from the four winds, O Spirit, and breathe on these slain, that they may live," resonated deeply. These spiritual luminaries posited that the wind, which had so uniquely traversed the sukkahs, was not merely a physical gust but a symbolic breath from the divine. For them, it represented a profound spiritual awakening for the nation of Israel, a revitalization akin to the dry bones receiving new life. The sukkahs themselves, as temporary dwellings designed to remind Israel of God's protective presence during their wilderness wanderings, were interpreted as the initial recipients of this divine breath, symbolizing a re-sanctification of the human dwelling places and, by extension, the spiritual renewal of the people. This interpretation offered a direct, powerful connection between the observed phenomenon and the enduring covenantal promises of renewal and restoration for Israel. The discussion, however, extended beyond immediate religious leaders to the broader community of prophecy scholars, academics, theologians, and researchers dedicated to interpreting eschatological texts. These scholars, often operating across denominational lines, saw in the wind during Sukkot an even more profound implication. For them, it was not merely a significant event, but the first visible, tangible indication of the commencement of a new prophetic cycle. This cycle, a period long anticipated and intensely studied, was believed to culminate in the time when the Creator himself would return to dwell among humanity. One particularly articulate messianic commentator, known for his synthesis of Jewish prophetic texts with New Testament interpretations, offered a compelling, albeit speculative, assessment that quickly gained traction. Speaking to a small, dedicated group of students and online followers, he stated, "God is testing human dwellings before descending upon them again." This statement, widely shared and debated, positioned the wind not just as a sign or a spiritual awakening, but as a preparatory act. It implied that the divine presence was actively assessing, perhaps purifying or readying, the physical and spiritual environments of mankind. The sukkahs, therefore, were not just touched by the wind, but were being tested as prototypes for future divine habitation. This perspective elevated the mystery from a localized religious phenomenon to an event of immense eschatological scale, suggesting that the very cosmos was responding to an unfolding divine plan. It effectively prepared the narrative ground for the expectation of even greater, more transformative events yet to come, hinting at a world on the precipice of an epochal shift. The unmeasurable wind in Jerusalem, therefore, became more than a meteorological curiosity. It was enshrined in the minds of many as the inaugural tremor of an impending, world-altering divine manifestation. As the sun dipped below the horizon of the Judean hills on October 8, 2025, casting long shadows across a city still reverberating from the morning's inexplicable wind, an entirely new dimension of celestial spectacle began to unfold. The evening sky, typically a canvas for the first stars, became the stage for a rare astronomical event, the Draconids meteor shower. This phenomenon, known for its sporadic and often faint activity, burst forth with an unexpected intensity, precisely coinciding with the conclusion of the seventh day of Sukkot, a calendar alignment that immediately struck many as beyond mere chance. From rooftop gatherings in ancient quarters to open fields beyond the city's modern sprawl, thousands turned their gaze upward. The clear, unseasonably warm night provided an unobstructed view as luminous fragments of cosmic debris began to cut across the dark expanse. Streaks of light, ranging from fleeting glimmers to longer, incandescent trails, pierced the inky blackness, momentarily illuminating the collective awe etched on countless faces below. Each flash was a silent explosion, a brilliant punctuation mark in the vast cosmic silence, an almost ethereal firework display unfurling above the holy city. This was not the expected, predictable shower often observed in other parts of the world. It was a vibrant, almost miraculous manifestation of light that drew gasps and whispers of wonder from onlookers. For those who had witnessed the profound, purposeful wind hours earlier, and particularly for the growing number of religious leaders and prophecy scholars, the simultaneous occurrence of fire in the sky and wind on the earth was instantaneously understood as more than a bizarre coincidence. It was swiftly interpreted as a complementary set of divine messages, each element amplifying the other. The morning's mysterious breath, which had stirred the sukkahs in the souls of Jerusalem, was seen as the breath of the Spirit preparing the way, a profound spiritual anointing and purification of the earthly realm. The brilliant, fiery display overhead, conversely, was deemed the brilliance from above sealing the announcement, a cosmic affirmation, a spectacular heavenly signature on the days earlier, more intimate earthly communication. The synchronicity presented an undeniable narrative for those seeking spiritual answers, linking the atmospheric and the astronomical into a cohesive, divine proclamation. This dual phenomenon unfolded against a backdrop of global affairs that largely remained oblivious to Jerusalem's singular experience. International news channels continued their ceaseless coverage of political maneuverings in distant capitals, the escalation of regional conflicts, and the latest financial market fluctuations. Social media feeds, while sporadically displaying amateur footage from Jerusalem, were still largely dominated by trending scandals and everyday distractions. The world, by and large, continued to be consumed by its own affairs, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the profound events transpiring in this ancient land. Yet, in Jerusalem, the perception was starkly different. The city found itself at the epicenter of what many believers, across diverse faith traditions, believed to be the unequivocal prelude to a new chapter, a pivotal moment in human and divine history. The interpretations coalesced around the powerful words of Zechariah 14 verse 9, "On that day the Lord will be king over the whole earth, on that day there will be one Lord, and his name the only name." The wind and the celestial fire were seen as tangible signs, literal fulfillments commencing a long-awaited era, where the spiritual sovereignty of the Creator would be undeniably manifest. As abruptly as it had commenced that morning, the extraordinary wind ceased. The subtle tremors in the air, the purposeful rustling of leaves and fabrics, and the deep, resonating hum between the valleys simply dissipated. A palpable silence, distinct from the earlier profound stillness, settled back over Jerusalem, one tinged with a new, almost unsettling quality. It was a silence that held the weight of what had transpired, a silent witness to a moment of profound cosmic intersection. A collective shiver, not from cold, but from an undeniable sense of awe and spiritual revelation, passed through the city. An inescapable feeling persisted, that an invisible boundary, the delicate membrane separating the natural from the divine, had been irrevocably crossed, leaving an indelible mark on the physical and spiritual landscape. In the days and weeks that followed, the accounts of those who bore witness to both the wind and the fire were remarkably consistent. Many returned to their home nations, whether across continents or to neighboring towns, carrying not just memories, but a transformed perspective. Their tears, once shed in an initial outpouring of emotion, were now often accompanied by a profound, unshakable hope. Each carried the same, deeply ingrained certainty: God had passed through there. The air, they would often recount, had never felt the same. For them, the wind that swept through the sukkahs was not a mere atmospheric event, it was the first breath of a kingdom about to manifest, an opening declaration of an impending divine epic that had just begun to unfold over Jerusalem. The extraordinary events of October 8, 2025, in Jerusalem culminated as abruptly as they began. The enigmatic wind, which had stirred both physical dwellings and spiritual convictions, subsided into a profound quietude, leaving an altered atmosphere in its wake. This earthly phenomenon was then mirrored by a celestial spectacle, the Draconid's meteor shower, or rare display of light that carved luminous paths across the night sky, precisely at the close of Sukkot. For those who witnessed this duality, the fire in the sky and wind on the earth were not disparate occurrences but rather complementary communiques, the breath of the spirit preparing the ground, and the cosmic brilliance sealing an announcement of epical significance. The world, largely distracted by its familiar narratives, remained oblivious to what many in Jerusalem perceived as the inauguration of a new prophetic era, a literal foreshadowing of a time when ancient scriptures declare the unified reign of the divine. The legacy of that day lingers, not just in eyewitness accounts, but in a persistent sense of anticipation. It suggests that certain thresholds, once crossed, leave an indelible mark on the fabric of reality, blurring the lines between the perceived natural and the profoundly spiritual. The air, irrevocably changed for those who experienced it, continues to carry the unspoken promise of what that wind truly heralded, not merely a meteorological event, but, for many, the inaugural breath of a kingdom poised to manifest. What are your reflections on the events of October 8th? Do you perceive these occurrences as mere coincidence, or as profound signals within a larger tapestry? Share your thoughts in the comments below. For further explorations into ancient texts and compelling narratives, we invite you to explore other videos on our channel. If this journey into the inexplicable resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Scripture's Flow for more content that delves into the profound mysteries of our world.